It was a bright morning at a small university. A group of students sat quietly, waiting for their philosophy professor to arrive. Moments later, the professor walked into the classroom, holding a large, empty glass jar in one hand and a bag filled with big stones in the other. Without saying a single word, he placed the jar on the table and smiled at his students. Everyone looked at him curiously, wondering what he was about to do. The professor picked up the bag and began placing large stones inside the jar, one by one. He kept adding stones until the jar was completely filled. Then he looked at the students and asked, "Is the jar full?" The students replied in unison, "Yes, Professor, it's full." The professor smiled but didn't respond. Next, he took out a small box filled with tiny pebbles and poured them into the jar. The pebbles rolled around the big stones and settled into the empty spaces. He looked at the class again and asked, "Is the jar full now?" This time, the students hesitated, but eventually said, "Yes, now it's definitely full." The professor smiled again, but still, he didn't stop. Then he picked up a container of fine sand and slowly poured it into the jar. The sand trickled down and filled every little gap between the stones and pebbles. Once again, he asked, "Is it full now?" The students laughed. "Yes, Professor, now it's really, really full." But the professor raised his hand and said softly, "Not yet." Finally, he took a glass of water and poured it into the jar. The water seeped into the tiniest spaces, soaking the sand, and the jar was now truly full. The students sat amazed. Some were laughing, some were confused, and some leaned forward, eager to know the meaning behind the experiment. The professor looked at his students and said, "This jar represents your life. The big stones are the most important things: family, health, dreams, and happiness. The pebbles represent other things that matter: work, career, money, education. The sand is everything else: small worries, distractions, and temporary problems. And the water? That's the extra joys and little moments that make life beautiful." He paused and continued, "If you fill your jar with sand first, there will be no room for stones or pebbles. In the same way, if you waste all your time on small, unimportant things, you'll never have space for what truly matters. Always put the big stones first. Focus on your health, relationships, and dreams. Everything else will find its place around them." The classroom fell silent. Each student was lost in thought, realizing how much time they spent worrying about the sand instead of focusing on their stones. Set your priorities right. Take care of what truly matters first, because when you focus on the important things, everything else falls into place.